For years, fans wondered why Cliff Richard suddenly disappeared from the spotlight, but the truth is more shocking than anyone expected. The legendary singer whose hits defined generations stepped back from fame in a way that left the public puzzled. Behind the scenes, personal struggles, controversies, and life-changing decisions were quietly unfolding. Now, after years of speculation, we finally know the real reason Cliff Richard vanished, and it's nothing like people imagined. When Cliff Richard burst onto the British music scene in the late 1950s, the landscape of youth culture was still taking shape. Britain had no Elvis, no fully formed rock and roll identity of its own, and the pop industry remained cautious, built largely around polished crooners and variety show charmers. Then came 1958's Move It, a raw, swaggering single that critics would later call the first authentic British rock and roll record. It wasn't just a hit. It was a signal flare announcing that a new generation, with its own sound and its own idols, had arrived. Practically overnight, Cliff Richard became one of Britain's first true rock/pop stars, carving out territory that future icons like the Beatles and the Rolling Stones would expand beyond anything the industry could imagine at the time. Throughout the early 1960s, Cliff's public profile only grew. He stacked up chart-topping singles, fronted films, and became a fixture on radio and television. He wasn't simply a singer, he was a national presence, the kind of star whose every move, from hairstyle to holiday plans, invited attention. But behind the sheen of fame, the decade was marked by a profound personal turning point: the death of his father in 1961. According to his biography, this loss devastated him. His father had been a central force in his life, encouraging his early ambitions and grounding him through the chaos of sudden celebrity. When he died, Cliff was only 20, still young, still adjusting to the dizzying peak of pop stardom. The grief hit hard, and by many accounts it sharpened Cliff's sense of responsibility toward his mother and sisters, reinforcing in him a duty that extended far beyond chart success. This same year, 1961, revealed another layer of the inner conflict that fame imposed on him. In a letter to his then-girlfriend, Delia Wicks, Cliff wrote an unusually candid admission. "Being a pop singer, I have to give up one priceless thing: the right to any lasting relationship with any special girl." The words were tender but resolute, hinting at a young man already making calculated choices about what his life could and could not contain. For all the glamour projected onto him by the press, he knew that his career demanded long stretches away from home, constant scrutiny, and an image carefully managed for millions of fans. To him, committing to a long-term relationship risked bringing emotional turmoil to someone he cared about, and risked destabilizing the stability he felt obligated to maintain for his family. By the time the 1970s arrived, Cliff Richard had already carved out his place in British cultural history. Although the explosive chart dominance of his early career had mellowed, he remained a constant presence in the UK music landscape, a figure whose longevity itself became part of his mythology. While musical tastes shifted through glam rock, disco, new wave, and synth pop, Cliff adapted with a professional discipline that echoed the careful life choices he had made years earlier. He continued to record regularly, releasing both standout singles and albums that performed respectably, and he maintained a visibility few of his contemporaries could match. Even without the fevered teenage hysteria of the 1960s, Cliff Richard was still Cliff Richard, a household name, a perennial performer, and a reliable fixture of televised music specials and charity events. During these decades, his image also crystallized into something unusual for a global pop star: the lifelong bachelor with an unwavering Christian faith. While many artists of his era became tabloid fodder for their marriages, divorces, affairs, and scandals, Cliff's personal life remained remarkably consistent. In public interviews, he emphasized that neither marriage nor fatherhood had ever been essential components of what he considered a full, meaningful life. Statements attributed to him in the mid-2000s reporting, including comments from 2006 explicitly noting he had never been married, reinforced this. Cliff framed these choices not as emotional absences, but as deliberate decisions aligned with his identity, his spiritual values, and the complex demands of a career that had begun when he was barely out of adolescence. Yet, despite this equilibrium, the stability of Cliff Richard's later life was profoundly shaken in the 2000s. Beginning in 2014, he became the focus of a highly publicized police investigation into historical sexual assault allegations he forcefully denied and was never charged for. The ordeal reached its most intrusive point when the BBC, tipped off by law enforcement, broadcast live helicopter footage of police raiding his Berkshire home. This spectacle, played out in real time on national television, pushed Cliff into one of the most punishing crises of his life. In a 2018 interview, he described this period as the lowest moment he had ever endured. His words were stark. "I've had 4 terrible years. It felt like I was in thick mud, a hole, and I didn't know how to get out." Coming from someone whose public persona had long been defined by composure and optimism, the admission underscored the sheer psychological weight of the accusations and the relentless media scrutiny. For decades, Cliff Richard had controlled the narrative around his personal life, its boundaries, its silences, its carefully maintained privacy. Suddenly, that control was shattered, replaced by an environment where speculation overwhelmed fact, and where his name circulated in headlines for reasons that had nothing to do with music. The eventual resolution, including the collapse of the investigation and his successful legal action against the BBC, did little to erase the emotional toll. What it did highlight, however, was the precarious balance between fame and vulnerability. A balance Cliff had managed for most of his career, but which, in this period, tilted brutally against him. These years showed how even a carefully protected personal life can be upended when public visibility intersects with institutional power and media aggression. The most destabilizing chapter of Cliff Richard's public life began abruptly in August 2014, when South Yorkshire Police conducted a highly publicized search of his Berkshire apartment. The operation stemmed from an investigation into allegations of sexual assault, allegations he consistently denied, and for which he was neither arrested nor charged. Under ordinary circumstances, a search of a private residence would have remained a discreet law enforcement action. Instead, it unfolded as a media spectacle, with BBC cameras capturing aerial footage of officers entering his home. The images broadcast across national television created the appearance of guilt long before any evidentiary evaluation could take place. It would later emerge that the BBC had secured this access through direct cooperation with the police. Emails and testimony revealed that South Yorkshire Police had taken the unusual step of sharing operational details with the broadcaster in advance, allowing them to film the raid in real time. The arrangement drew immediate and sustained criticism, not only from Cliff Richard's supporters, but from legal experts, privacy advocates, and members of Parliament. For many observers, the raid became an emblem of institutional overreach, a moment when the pursuit of spectacle overshadowed principles of fairness and confidentiality. 2 years later, in June 2016, the Crown Prosecution Service announced that there was insufficient evidence to charge him. The investigation drew to a close without any criminal action, but the damage to his sense of security and dignity had already been profound. Cliff described the experience as being hung out like live bait, a phrase that conveyed both vulnerability and a sense of betrayal. His name had been linked to severe allegations in the most public manner possible, and the absence of charges did not erase the psychological impact of those years. In 2018, he won a landmark High Court case against the BBC. The ruling found that the broadcaster's coverage had violated his privacy rights, and he was awarded substantial damages. The judgment was an extraordinary moment in British media law, a formal acknowledgement that the balance between public interest and individual privacy had been badly mishandled. For Cliff, it provided a measure of vindication, but it did not negate the 4 years he described as some of the darkest of his life. During and following this period, his professional behavior shifted noticeably. While still active, he stepped back from the heavy touring schedules and frequent media appearances that had defined much of his career. His public calendar became less demanding, his visibility more selective. After decades of near-constant engagement with audiences and broadcasters, he seemed to recalibrate his relationship to the spotlight. This was not a retreat from music. He continued to record and perform, but a controlled reduction in exposure, suggesting a need to preserve emotional equilibrium after a prolonged, deeply public ordeal. The crisis became a dividing line in Cliff Richard's later career. Before 2014, a veteran entertainer with a stable public image. After 2014, an artist forced to confront the fragility of reputation in the modern media ecosystem. The raid, the investigation, the protracted uncertainty, and the eventual legal victory formed an arc that reshaped not only how he was seen, but how he navigated public life. What emerged was a figure more guarded, more measured, and undeniably marked by the weight of an experience that he neither invited nor deserved. As Cliff Richard entered his 8th decade, the realities of aging began to shape both his professional and personal life in ways he had not publicly confronted for decades. Known for his near-constant presence on the British music scene from the late 1950s onward, Richard had built a career defined by tireless touring, relentless media appearances, and a singular devotion to his craft. However, by the 2020s, he himself acknowledged that maintaining the grueling pace of performance and public engagements he had sustained for more than 60 years was becoming physically more challenging. In a 2025 interview, when asked whether his ongoing tour might be his final one, he responded with a stark, matter-of-fact reflection. "I might be dead the next year. I don't even think about it anymore." The remark captures a perspective shaped not only by age, but by a lifetime spent at the forefront of an industry where visibility is constant, energy demands are high, and the pressure to perform never fully abates. Richard's life and career had always been guided by a particular set of priorities, most notably his faith, his dedication to music, and his responsibilities toward his family. Over the decades, these priorities often dictated the shape of his personal life. Publicly, he has long acknowledged that one of the reasons he never married was that doing so, and having children, would have limited his ability to devote himself fully to his career. In a 2013 interview, he explained that marriage and fatherhood would have demanded a level of time, attention, and emotional commitment incompatible with the itinerant, performance-heavy life of a touring musician. This long-standing choice, intertwined with his Christian faith and sense of duty to those closest to him, meant that even as he achieved extraordinary success, his private life was deliberately circumscribed. The absence of marriage or children, in his own view, was not a deficit, but a conscious trade-off to allow the fullest expression of his artistic ambitions and commitments. Yet it was not only the physical realities of aging that contributed to his gradual withdrawal from the public eye. Richard's later years were marked by a deeply stressful public ordeal that intersected with his private life in ways that few could have anticipated. In August 2014, his apartment in Berkshire was searched by South Yorkshire police as part of an investigation into allegations of historical sexual assault. While he was neither arrested nor subsequently charged, the events were amplified by the controversial cooperation between the police and the BBC, which allowed journalists to film the raid. The media coverage was widely criticized for its intrusiveness and sensationalism, and Richard later described the experience as profoundly damaging. He felt hung out like live bait, forced to endure public scrutiny at a time of immense personal distress. After nearly 2 years of legal and emotional uncertainty, the Crown Prosecution Service concluded in June 2016 that there was insufficient evidence to proceed with any charges. Richard subsequently pursued legal action against the BBC, and in 2018, he won a high court case that awarded him damages for the mishandling of the media coverage. Despite the eventual vindication, the emotional toll of the ordeal was significant, and it coincided with a reduction in his public engagements and touring schedule. The episode underscored how even a figure as seasoned and media-savvy as Richard could be vulnerable to the pressures and intrusions of contemporary celebrity culture. By the time he reached his 80s, these cumulative factors, aging, the lingering impact of the 2014 to 2016 investigation, and his long-held desire for privacy, converged to shape a quieter phase of his life. While Richard continued to perform and tour selectively, he did so on his own terms, balancing the demands of performance with his need for rest and personal space. His public statements convey a pragmatic, almost philosophical acceptance of the natural limits imposed by time. He no longer felt compelled to maintain the exhaustive schedule of his earlier decades, and he openly reflected on the possibility that each tour could be his last. Yet even in scaling back, he remained committed to the elements of his life that had always been central: music, faith, and family. These enduring priorities, combined with the lessons of decades in the spotlight, including both triumphs and profound challenges, have allowed Cliff Richard to navigate his later years with a measured blend of resilience, reflection, and a continued devotion to the work that defined his extraordinary career. What do you think about Cliff Richard's disappearance? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.